How does a whole nation, how does a whole world become enslaved? How did the Israelites become enslaved? They made an agreement with somebody who could provide for them what they could not provide for themselves. Food, sustenance, care, protection. How come the Israelites could not provide for themselves? Well, they had thrown their own brother into bondage. And their brother informed the Pharaoh that famine was coming, that difficult times were coming, and the Pharaoh prepared. Had that brother been there with his other 11 brothers, they could have prepared, and the Pharaoh would have come to them. But the reality is jealousy and envy do not lend themselves to freedom. And so they went into bondage. 1/5 of everything they earned had to go to the government because of the agreement that they had made. They had sold themselves, in a sense, into bondage, at least into servitude. You cannot sell yourself a slave, but you can sell yourself into servitude. There is no involuntary servitude in the United States. It's not allowed. The same as there was no involuntary servitude in the case of Israel in Egypt. They volunteered. They signed up. They became members of a Corvée system of statutory labor. It's a complex issue when we apply that to today, but the reality is that's exactly what has happened today in almost every country throughout the world. Because we have not come together, we have found ourselves short of provisions. We have been enticed by what rulers have to offer. Unlike Proverbs, we did not take that advice and put a knife to our throats, but we were men of appetite, and we did freely eat, and we did freely go under that authority. Early Americans didn't have that temptation. They lived by the work of their own hands. They had become free and independent people. So that when the government began to exercise or assert authority that it did not have, they could say, we can throw off this government. Americans today can't say that. They have not taken the responsibilities for themselves, for their families, for their communities. They have turned that responsibility over to government, just like the Israelites had to do in the days where Pharaoh became a ruler. And of course, the Pharaoh that loved Joseph and cared for those people died, and a new Pharaoh came who didn't care for them as much, took their sons and daughters, took their livelihood, their first fruits, increased their burdens. That's what's happened in America. We go into great detail about this in the chapter Employ versus Enslave in the book The Covenants of the Gods. It's a complex issue. We detail it very clearly in that chapter. What has taken place? Wages and salaries were not income. They became income because you made an agreement. You made that agreement by signing up with Social Security, by applying for benefits. Social Security gave you an employer identification number. You can get one other ways. A TIN can work as an employer identification number, but a Social Security number works just as well. It's in the Social Security Act that this is a part of your income tax obligation. Now, when you have wages and salaries, which used to be simply compensation, you do $5 worth of work, they give you $5. There's no income, there's no profit, there's no gain. Pollock versus Farmer, case after case show this. Still to this day, Americans who read the case law, they can't figure out, is income tax a direct tax? Is it an indirect tax? It's an excise tax upon the exercise of working. My father was an attorney, and I asked him when I was a small boy, who do you work for? He said, until July 1st, I worked for the federal government. What he was telling me, and I didn't really put the dots together of what he was saying at the time, but what he was saying is he was in a 50% income tax bracket, and until July 1st, he was working for the federal government. They would take the first fruits of his labor because he was a part of that system. He understood how it worked. And that's the way it does work. If you work at Burger King, the first 2-3 hours of work in the morning, all those burgers you flip them for the federal government. All the value you produced by doing that labor will be collected by someone with a federal employer identification number, and he will send that money to the federal government. And that's who you're working for those first few hours of that morning, for the federal government. You're in a Corby system of statutory bondage, labor, whatever you want to call it. You are in service to the gods of that system, the rulers of that system. You are doing the work for them. And you have agreed to that. It's in the law. It's in the books. It's not fraud. You have simply not taken the time to study these things out. We've condensed them down into short chapters. We offer them to you with lots of footnotes so you can check it out so that you know whether we're telling you the truth or not. And then you'll have to decide for yourself what's going on. You can't just undo that. You are in that system. The Israelites couldn't just fill out some paperwork and then say, okay, we're leaving Egypt. They were in bondage. And they remained in bondage until they were kicked out. Same thing was taking place under a system called Corban under Herod the Great and the Pharisees. And Jesus got them kicked out. But before they got kicked out, it was very important they learned to operate as a free people. They had to repent. They had to turn around. They had to learn to take care of one another with faith, hope, and charity. Once they learn how to do that, then they can undo or be prepared for the undoing of the bondage they now find themselves in.